the slow flicker of the hallway nightlight, was the only thing moving as I overheard my son calling me dead weight. Still, I pressed my palm to the wall, letting the cool drywall steady the anger rising in my throat. As that same faint glow pulsed, it felt like it was exposing more truth than his entire speech. While I listened, the light's soft blink matched the sting building behind my ribs. The same glow showed me he hadn't slipped once. He'd chosen this path long ago. That's when I chose mine. I'd walk away with dignity he'd never learned to carry. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and roasted ham, the kind of warm holiday scent that used to mean comfort for Ed Palmer. Tonight, it just reminded him that he was standing in someone else's home, trying not to get in the way. He hovered near the counter with a dish towel over his shoulder, drying pans as Madison moved around with crisp, practiced efficiency. Every time he reached for something, she reached faster. Every time he tried to help, she redirected him with a tight smile, the kind that said thank you, but please stop breathing in my space. Ed kept telling himself he was helping, that being useful mattered. So he stayed quiet, folding the towel neatly as he waited for another task. Madison didn't give him one. Kyle's footsteps thumped down the stairs, quick and impatient. "Dad," he said, brushing past him toward the fridge, "you're blocking the cabinet." Then he added, louder and with a joking tone that somehow stung more, "Don't you have an early bedtime at your age?" Lily giggled because she thought she was supposed to, but even she looked up at Ed as if sensing the jab wasn't funny. Ed stepped aside, nodding as if the comment slid right off him. He focused on the sink, rinsing his hands longer than necessary. Holiday lights blinked through the kitchen window, soft and cheerful, mocking the heaviness in his chest. A few minutes later, as he walked toward the living room to give them space, he heard low voices coming from the dining area. Kyle's tone was sharp, Madison's sharper. "I'm serious," she whispered, frustration threading every syllable. "We can't keep paying for everything. Groceries, heating, prescriptions. This is not sustainable." Kyle murmured something Ed couldn't make out. Then Madison said, clear as a blade slicing through wrapping paper, "We can't do this with him here next year." Ed froze mid-step. For a moment he wondered if they knew he was there. Then he realized it didn't matter. The words weren't meant for him. They weren't even spoken with hesitation. They were simply a decision being shaped in real time, about him but without him. Dinner felt like sitting under a spotlight he hadn't agreed to. Every fork scrape sounded louder. Madison's comments came wrapped in politeness but laced with irritation. "We're a little tight on space this year," she said while passing the potatoes. "Heating bills have been crazy too with extra people in the house." Kyle said nothing, not even a token attempt to soften her edges. He just sipped his wine, eyes drifting anywhere but toward his father. Ed chewed slowly, trying not to show the way each remark chipped something inside him. D worked his whole life to raise this family, taken pride in giving them stability, and somehow he'd become the line item they couldn't wait to erase. After dinner, he sat next to Lily on the living room rug and handed her a small wrapped box. "Just something little," he said, watching her tear the paper with excited fingers. Inside was a tiny silver locket with her initials engraved. "Your dad used to collect shiny little things when he was your age," Ed said softly. "Rocks, bottle caps, buttons, anything he thought had a story." Lily laughed, delighted, but Kyle shifted awkwardly on the couch. He didn't like when Ed unearthed memories that reminded him he'd once been smaller, softer, dependent. He looked away, pretending to check a notification on his phone. Ed stayed with Lily until her parents sent her upstairs to get ready for bed. When the house quieted and the lights dimmed, he retreated to his makeshift sleeping space, the pull-out couch in the den. It sagged in the middle, the thin mattress pressing against metal bars that dug into his shoulders. He lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of Kyle and Madison cleaning up, their voices low and clipped. The house felt different at night, colder, less forgiving. It wasn't the home he used to imagine he'd retire into, surrounded by family, sharing stories next to a warm fireplace. It was a place where he had to move quietly, stay small, avoid taking up space or resources or breath. He pulled the blanket up to his chest and exhaled slowly, willing himself not to let the hurt settle too deep. They're stressed, he told himself. It's Christmas, money's tight everywhere, families snap sometimes, tomorrow will be better. But the truth pressed down on him heavier than the blanket. He didn't feel like a father in this house. He felt like a guest, a long-term guest who had overstayed his welcome. He closed his eyes, trying to believe that this was nothing more than holiday tension, temporary, fleeting, solvable. He tried to believe his son's silence wasn't intentional, that Madison's words weren't warning signs. He had no way of knowing that the words he overheard tonight were seeds of something that would grow into a moment he couldn't imagine yet. A moment waiting for him just hours ahead, wrapped not in Christmas warmth, but in cold, unforgiving snow. And as he lay there on the pull-out couch, turning from side to side, trying to sleep in a house that no longer felt like his, he didn't realize one thing. This Christmas Eve wasn't the start of a holiday. It was the start of an ending. Christmas morning should have started quietly, coffee brewing, wrapping paper rustling, the soft hum of holiday music. Instead, the house felt tense before the sun even finished rising. Ed tried to help set up the living room, adjusting a small ceramic reindeer on the mantel. His hands weren't as steady as they used to be, and when he turned to grab a stocking, his elbow brushed the edge of one of Madison's tall glass decorations. It wobbled once, twice, then toppled and shattered across the floor. For a moment, the house froze with the same shock Ed felt. He bent down quickly, muttering an apology as he reached for the larger pieces. But Madison was already storming in from the kitchen, her voice sharp enough to sting. "Are you kidding me, Ed?" she snapped, stopping short at the broken glass. "I spent all week putting this place together and you just, what? You don't watch where you're going, you don't respect our home." Her emphasis on our landed harder than the crash had. Ed straightened slowly, palms open, trying to keep his voice steady. "It was an accident, Madison, I'm sorry. I'll clean it up." But she didn't want apologies. She wanted someone to blame, someone easy, someone who was already walking on eggshells. Kyle appeared behind her, arms crossed, eyes tight with embarrassment. He didn't say a word. He didn't even step forward to help. Madison pressed on, her voice rising with each sentence. "This house is too crowded. We're spending more and more on groceries, on heating, on everything. And then this happens." She gestured at the glass as if Ed had deliberately thrown it. "We can't live like this." Ed swallowed the sting. "I never wanted to be a burden," he whispered. "I'm doing the best I can." Kyle rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding eye contact. "Dad, look, we've been talking, okay? And we think it might be best if you start looking for another place to stay. Soon." The word soon felt like a shove. Ed looked from his son to Madison, then back to the shattered glass. "I just got here," he said, voice cracking. "It's Christmas." "We know," Madison said, though her tone suggested she didn't care at all. "But this situation isn't working. Not for us." Kyle finally stepped forward, his frustration boiling over as if he'd been holding it in for months. "Dad, come on. I can't do this anymore. The tension, the bills, the constant, everything. You need to leave. Today." The room spun for a second. Ed felt the floor tilt beneath him, not from age or dizziness but from disbelief. His son, his only son, was staring at him with a firmness that left no room for hope or negotiation. "Today," Ed whispered. "Kyle, I don't have anywhere." "I'm sorry," Kyle cut in, though he didn't look sorry at all. "But this isn't my responsibility anymore." Madison folded her arms, satisfied now that the words had been spoken out loud. Lily, hearing the raised voices, padded in from the hallway in her fuzzy Christmas pajamas. She looked from her parents to her grandfather, confusion filling her small face. "Grandpa, why are you crying?" Ed hadn't realized he was. He knelt down and opened his arms, and Lily ran straight into them. She clung to him with a desperation far beyond her age. "Don't leave," she begged, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Please don't leave." Ed wished he could promise her anything, but he had nothing left to offer except a trembling hug. Kyle cleared his throat. "Lily, go upstairs. This is grown-up stuff." She shook her head fiercely. "No." Madison stepped in, pulling her daughter back with gentle firmness, whispering something meant to calm her. Lily kept reaching for Ed, tears streaking down her cheeks. Ed stood slowly, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. He walked to the hall closet, his steps deliberate, controlled, because if he didn't control them, they would collapse. His old suitcase sat exactly where they'd told him to keep it. He lifted it, feeling the familiar tug of worn-out wheels. He didn't pack. There wasn't much to gaff. Just his shaving kit, his jacket, and the one wrapped gift he hadn't had the chance to give Kyle yet. Lily sobbed harder as he approached the front door. "Grandpa, don't go," she whispered again. Ed touched her cheek, forcing a soft smile. "I'll see you soon, sweetheart," he said, unsure if it was true. Then he turned to Kyle, searching his son's face for even a flicker of regret. There was none, only relief that the scene was almost over. Ed stepped outside into the biting December air. Snowflakes drifted lazily from a gray sky, settling on his jacket and suitcase. Behind him, the door closed with a quiet click, too gentle for what it meant, too final for what he felt. He stood on the walkway for a long moment, breath clouding in front of him, the cold sinking through his bones. Christmas morning surrounded him with cheerful lights and distant laughter from neighboring houses. But he had nowhere to go. And the house behind him, the one where his son lived, the one where he'd hoped to spend the rest of his days surrounded by family, had just shut him out. On Christmas Day. And with every step he took down the snowy street, he felt the truth settling deeper. This wasn't just a bad moment. This was the beginning of something far worse. The motel sat just off the highway, wedged between a gas station and a darkened diner with a flickering neon sign. It wasn't the kind of place anyone chose for Christmas, not unless they had nowhere else to go. Ed stood at the front desk with his small suitcase at his feet, the clerk barely looking up as she handed him a key card. He paid in cash, money he'd once saved for emergencies he never imagined would look like this. When he reached the room, the heater roared to life with a low, tired hum, filling the silence with something just shy of comfort. The room smelled faintly of old carpet cleaner and stale air. A single lamp cast a weak glow over the bed, its patterned bedspread worn from years of use. Ed set his suitcase on the chair, the fabric cushion sinking under the weight. He sat down on the edge of the bed, letting the warmth from the heater reach him slowly, thawing the cold that had settled into his bones after walking away from his son's house. He turned on the television, more for noise than entertainment. A cheerful holiday special filled the screen, families gathered around decorated trees, children opening presents, parents laughing. None of it matched the reality of the cheap motel room or the leftovers he pulled from his suitcase. Madison had insisted he take the food he'd planned to bring for Christmas dinner, but it felt different now. Microwaving cold ham and mashed potatoes in a motel lobby microwave, while listening to strangers talk about travel plans. He sat at the small table and ate slowly, each bite hitting him with the reminder that he'd been pushed out on a day meant for togetherness. He kept the TV on, letting the artificial joy wash over him, but it only made the room feel smaller. He wondered how they were spending their Christmas now, Kyle and Madison, if they were relieved, if they even talked about what happened after the door closed behind him. His phone buzzed on the table, lighting up with the name Frank. Ed hesitated before answering. Frank's voice came through loud and gruff, but with a thread of concern. "Saw something weird on Kyle's feed," he said. "Something about giving you space." "You doing all right, buddy?" Ed stared at the wall before answering. Yeah, I'm fine. They're just dealing with some stuff. Didn't want to crowd them." "Crowd them?" Frank barked. "You're his father, Ed. You all right? Need me to come pick you up?" Ed swallowed hard. "No, I'm good. Just needed a little break, that's all." Frank didn't buy it. Ed could hear it in the long pause, but he didn't push. "Call me if you need anything, seriously." "I will," Ed said, even though he wouldn't. After the call ended, the room felt even quieter. The heater hummed, the TV flickered, and the loneliness pressed in from all sides. A few minutes later, his phone rang again, this time Dr. Mills. He stared at the screen, considering letting it go to voicemail, but finally picked up. "Hi, Ed. Just checking in since we talked before the holidays," she said warmly. "How are you holding up?" "I'm with family," he said automatically. The lie slipped out easily, almost rehearsed. But as soon as the words left his mouth, something in him tightened. He stopped, let out a slow breath, and corrected himself. "Actually, no, I'm not with them right now, just taking it easy." Dr. Mills didn't press, but her silence told him she understood more than he'd said. "Remember what we talked about," she said gently. "Your health matters, and so does being around people who value you." "I know," he whispered. After he hung up, the room finally caught up with him. The thin walls, the faded carpet, the hum that pretended to be warmth. He sat back on the bed and let the hurt he'd been holding in spill out quietly. Not loud, not dramatic, just a slow, aching release. His hands covered his face as the truth settled in. Somehow, over time, he'd shifted from father to burden, from protector to problem. And he didn't understand how. He reached into his suitcase and pulled out the old photo he always kept tucked beneath his clothes, his wife, smiling in the backyard on a summer day, sunlight catching her hair. He traced her face with a trembling finger. "I messed this up somehow, did I?" he whispered. "I thought I raised them better, I thought." His voice thinned, lost in the heater's constant hum. "I thought family stuck together." He set the photo on the nightstand, the glass frame catching the dim motel light. Then he lay back on the bed, still wearing his jacket, too tired to remove it. The TV played another scene of holiday cheer, families gathering, parents hugging their children, and Ed watched without really seeing it. His eyes grew heavy, exhaustion and grief pulling him under. As he drifted towards sleep, the motel room felt unbearably small, like the edges of his life had shrunk to this single, dimly lit space. A far cry from the home he'd once imagined growing old in. And yet, it was all he had tonight. The heater hummed, the TV flickered, and the world beyond the thin motel curtains kept moving, leaving him behind. And as sleep finally claimed him, Ed didn't know that this night, this lonely, shrinking Christmas, was only the beginning of a different life forming quietly around him. A life he hadn't chosen, but one that was already waiting. The morning after Christmas came without ceremony. No gifts, no warm greetings, just a thin gray sky and a chill that clung to Ed's clothes as he stepped out of the motel lobby. He pulled his jacket tighter, the fabric stiff from the cold, and waited beside a snow-dusted curb for the cab he'd called. The driver pulled up with the radio humming softly, and Ed climbed in without saying much. When the driver asked for the address, Ed hesitated before answering. "Maple Street," he murmured, "number 19. The cab wove through quiet neighborhoods, past rows of small houses with holiday decorations still glowing faintly in the daylight. Each wreath, each string of lights felt like an echo of a world he no longer belonged to. When the cab turned onto Maple Street, Ed's breath caught in his chest. The house stood there just as he remembered it, small, square, modest, its white paint slightly weathered by Ohio winters. The front steps sagged a little, the porch light was crooked, but it was still his. He paid the driver and stepped out slowly, the cold crunching beneath his shoes. Ed didn't cross the street right away. Instead, he stood there, hands in his pockets, gazing at the house from a distance like it was a memory he wasn't ready to touch. The last time he'd looked at it this way was decades ago, when he and his wife first signed the papers. They stood on that porch imagining summer barbecues, noisy birthdays, the kids running in and out of the yard. Life had felt wide then, wide and full. Now it felt small. He closed his eyes and saw her laugh, the way she'd run her hand along the railing the day they moved in, claiming the house like it was a promise. Ed opened his eyes slowly, the ache settling deeper. "We had plans here," he whispered to the empty air. The tenants had moved out not long ago, leaving the place empty until he could find new renters. He'd planned to clean it up in January, maybe repaint a few rooms. Now it felt like the only place left that hadn't rejected him. With a slow breath, he crossed the street and climbed the familiar steps. His key slid into the lock with a soft click, and the door opened to a rush of cold, untouched air. Inside, the silence was thick, the kind that settles after tenants move out: blank walls, empty rooms, stray nails left from pictures taken down. Ed walked into the living room, each step stirring faint clouds of dust. Winter light streamed in through the blinds, illuminating dust motes drifting like tiny sparks in the stillness. For a long moment, Ed didn't move. He just stood there, letting the quiet wrap around him. After the chaos, after the accusations, after the cold dismissal from his own son's home, this silence felt almost sacred. This, this empty, worn house was the only place in his life that hadn't changed its mind about him. He ran his hand along the wall where his wife had once taped up a calendar every January. Her handwriting had lingered there for years in faint impressions of notes and reminders. He could still picture her here, watering the plants, folding laundry, humming to herself as she made dinner. And suddenly he realized, the world had taken many things from him over the years, but not this. This house was his. And Kyle had always assumed it would be his someday too. Ed remembered the casual comments: "When the house is mine, I'll fix that porch," or "Someday we'll tear down that old SH." Kyle had spoken like inheriting it was a guarantee, a future already waiting for him. But standing here now, the deed still in his name, Ed felt something spark beneath the grief, something small but steady, a glimmer of power. Kyle had thrown him out like a burden, like a bill to be erased. Yet here stood the one thing Ed still controlled, the one piece of his life no one could push him out of. He walked through each room slowly, taking in the echoes of the past. The small bedroom where Rachel used to draw on the walls, the bigger room Kyle once begged to paint blue, the kitchen where they'd spilled pancake batter 100 Sunday mornings. Every step reminded him of the life he had built long before his son decided he was inconvenient. When he reached the living room again, Ed set his suitcase down. There were no beds, no couches, nothing to soften the floorboards under his feet. But it was still safer than the motel, still warmer somehow than the house he'd been pushed out of. He unzipped his bag, pulled out the old sleeping bag he kept in the trunk for emergencies, and unrolled it across the floor. It didn't look like much, thin, worn, a far cry from comfort. But when he sat down on it, the familiar smell of fabric and years of camping trips hit him with a wave of memory. He leaned back against the wall and let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside him since yesterday afternoon. The house was cold, yes. Empty, yes. But it wasn't hostile. It wasn't ashamed of him. It wasn't waiting for him to slip up so it could push him away. It was his. As the winter light faded and the room dimmed, Ed stared at the ceiling, listening to the settling of the old house. He didn't know what came next. He didn't know how long he would stay here or what he was supposed to do now. But one thing was certain. This quiet, dusty house on Maple Street was the first place in a long time where he wasn't unwanted. And tonight, that was enough to keep him going. The cold morning air wrapped around Ed as he stepped out of the Maple Street house, locking the door behind him with a stiffness that came from more than just winter. After the motel, after the long night alone in an empty home, Dr. Mills's concerned voice echoed in his head. She had sensed something off during their brief call, and when she insisted he come in for a follow-up appointment, Ed didn't have the energy to refuse. It felt easier to show up than to pretend he was all right. The clinic's waiting room was warm, filled with soft music and holiday decorations that still hadn't been taken down. Ed sat quietly, hands folded, eyes drifting over the "Stay Active, Stay Healthy" posters along the walls. When Dr. Mills finally called him in, her expression was gentle but firm, like someone preparing to deliver truth, not comfort. She listened as he tried to minimize everything: the motel, the house, the just-needed space, explanation for why he wasn't with family anymore. But she saw through him in seconds. "Ed," she said, pulling her chair closer, "you need routine, you need purpose, and you need people around you. Otherwise this," she gestured at him, not unkindly, "this loneliness will break you down faster than any health condition." He nodded, staring at his shoes. "I'm managing." "You're surviving," she corrected softly. "That's different." Her words landed with a weight he couldn't ignore. He promised he'd try to stay active, try to stay engaged, try not to let himself disappear inside that empty house on Maple Street. But as he stepped outside into the cold again, he wondered where a man his age was supposed to find purpose now that family had failed him. The cab dropped him off near the edge of town, just a short walk from home. He trudged along the sidewalk, head down, until something bright caught his eye: a bold red banner stretched across the front of a massive hardware store. "Now hiring part-time associates." The words held his attention longer than he expected. He stopped on the sidewalk, staring through the wide glass windows at aisles lined with tools, lumber, paint cans, and things he'd spent a lifetime around. The place buzzed with steady activity: workers in vests stocking shelves, customers wandering with lists in hand. A little piece of the world he used to know. He must have been staring too long, because the front doors slid open with a hiss, and a stocky, middle-aged man in a navy jacket stepped out. "You lookin' for something?" the man asked, wiping sawdust from his palms. Ed startled slightly. "Oh no, I was just reading the sign." The man eyed him with a mix of curiosity and welcome. "You thinking about applying?" Embarrassment rose in Ed's throat. He glanced away. "I'm just an old factory guy," he mumbled. "Been out of the workforce a while, but I could use something to do." The man chuckled, a warm, easy sound. "Old factory guys are exactly the kind of people who know what they're doing around here." He stuck out his hand. "Tom Ray's store manager." Ed shook his hand, the grip steady and honest. "Ed Palmer." Tom looked him over, not judging, just assessing. "We're short-staffed for winter. People buy more than they know how to fix this time of year. You ever work with tools?" Ed huffed out a quiet laugh. 45 years in an auto plant. I can tell you the difference between a gasket and a bolt in my sleep." "That's a hell of a lot more useful than half the teenagers I got working here," Tom said. "You want hours? I can start you part-time. 3, maybe 4 days a week. You pick your shifts." Ed blinked, just like that. Tom shrugged, matter of fact. "Just like that. I trust people with experience, and you look like you could use something steady." The comment wasn't pity, it was recognition, and somehow that made Ed's throat tighten more than anger or shame ever had. He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, voice low but certain. "Yeah, I think I'd like that." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "Good, bring your ID tomorrow morning, I'll get you set up." As Ed walked home, something unfamiliar flickered inside him. Not hope exactly, but a sense of movement, activity, direction. Dr. Mills's words echoed again: purpose, routine, people. Maybe this was a start. Maybe he could rebuild something, if not a family, then at least a reason to get out of bed. When he reached the Maple Street house, he stood in the doorway for a moment, staring at the empty living room, the thin sleeping bag on the floor, the cold walls that didn't judge him for taking up space. He set his hand against the doorframe and let out a long, steady breath. He had accepted out of need, but something in him sensed the truth already forming in the quiet. This job, This unexpected place full of tools and strangers was going to become more than a paycheck. It was going to save him, and he had no idea just how much. Ed woke before dawn, the Maple Street house still cold enough that each breath lingered in the air. He dressed slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from the only collared shirt he owned that still looked decent. He buttoned it carefully, tucking it into his old factory pants, the fabric stiff but familiar. Starting over at 70 shouldn't have made him nervous. He'd lived through layoffs, funerals, and raising 2 kids. But somehow walking into a new job at his age felt like stepping into a world that had moved on without him. The hardware store's parking lot glowed under pale morning lights as he arrived. Snow crunched beneath his boots. He stood for a moment, holding the door handle, steadying himself. Then he pushed the door open, letting the warmth and the faint smell of sawdust wash over him. Tom spotted him immediately. "There he is," he said with a grin, "right on time." Ed nodded, trying to hide the tension in his face. Didn't want to be late on the first day. Tom clapped him on the back and led him toward the break room. A few younger employees were gathered around a table, sipping energy drinks and scrolling through their phones. Tom cleared his throat. "Everyone, this is Ed. He's joining us part-time." They looked up with mild curiosity. One kid in a beanie gave a half-wave. Another, a tall guy barely out of high school, smirked. "You sure you can lift this stuff?" he joked, nodding toward a stack of heavy boxes. The room chuckled lightly, and Ed forced a small smile. "I've lifted heavier things than that," he said, keeping his tone easy. It wasn't anger he felt. It was the familiar sting of being underestimated. But Tom shot the young worker a sharp look, and the joke stopped. The next few hours were a blur of movement. Tom walked him through the basics: how to stock shelves without blocking aisles where the ladders were stored, how to use the small radio clip to his vest. Ed listened carefully, his hands steady even when he felt his nerves buzzing. He learned the store layout: lumber, plumbing, electrical, tools, and by late morning he could already point customers in the right direction without checking the map behind the counter. Not everything came easily. The computer system baffled him at first, and the handheld scanner felt like holding a piece of technology from another planet. But Tom showed him slowly, patiently, treating him as someone capable, not someone fragile. By midday, Ed was sweeping aisle 9 when a young couple hurried in, the woman wrapped tightly in a heavy coat, the man carrying a small metal piece in his hand. They looked frazzled and cold, their breath still visible. "Excuse me," the man said, desperation creeping into his voice. "Our heater stopped working this morning. We have no clue what we're doing. Do you know anything about these?" Ed took the part gently, turning it over in his fingers. "Yeah," he said softly. "Yeah, I've seen plenty of these." He asked them a few questions about what happened, walked them to aisle 12, and explained the steps to replace the faulty component. He spoke slowly, not talking down to them, but guiding them the way older men once guided him when he was starting at the plant. The couple soaked up every word, nodding anxiously. "So we can fix it ourselves?" the woman asked. "You can," Ed said. "Just follow the steps I told you, and if it gives you trouble again, bring this part back and we'll see what else it might be." Relief washed over their faces. The man shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, sir. You really helped us." The word "sir" caught him off guard. Respect, gratitude, things he hadn't been shown in far too long. He watched them leave with a sense of warmth that had nothing to do with the store's heating. When his shift finally ended, his back ached and his shoulders throbbed in ways he wasn't used to anymore. But the tiredness felt earned, solid, almost comforting. He changed back into his jacket in the break room, listening to the younger employees argue about weekend plans. For once, he didn't feel out of place, just present. The sun was setting as he walked home. Snowflakes drifted lazily around him, melting on his warm cheeks. The Maple Street house waited in silence, the same empty shell it had been yesterday. But when he stepped inside, the cold didn't feel quite as sharp. He hung his coat on the door and stood in the dim living room for a moment, letting the soreness fade into something gentler. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like a burden. He felt useful, needed, capable. And as he lay down on his sleeping bag that night, the ache in his muscles reminded him of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, small, steady, and quietly returning. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm Ed hadn't expected, a quiet, steady cadence that began at the break of dawn and ended with the soft click of the store's closing doors. Aisle 12 became his territory, the place where he felt the most grounded. Rows of wrenches, extension cords, drill bits, and heater parts lined the shelves like old friends he hadn't realized he missed. He knew the feel of each item, the weight, the purpose, and customers quickly learned that Ed was the one who could answer their questions without rushing them or making them feel foolish. People began looking for him specifically. They'd peek down the aisle and smile with relief when they spotted him. "There he is," they'd say. "The guy who actually explains stuff." An older woman came in nearly every week with some new project her husband had started before he passed. Ed walked her through small fixes, never making her feel like she was bothering him. Another customer, a young college kid with a beat-up car, came in asking about tools he barely understood. Ed didn't judge. He guided him step by step, even drawing a makeshift diagram on the back of a receipt. Word spread. If you needed help with anything mechanical, anything that required patience or a sec. On look, you went to aisle 12. Tom noticed. He didn't say much at first, but the schedule spoke for him. More shifts appeared next to Ed's name. Busier hours, weekends, times when the store needed experience, not just bodies. One morning, Tom tapped the schedule sheet with the back of his pen and said, "You're good with people. You don't talk down to them. That matters around here." Then he walked off before Ed could respond. It was the closest thing Ed had felt to professional praise in years. One afternoon, the automatic doors whooshed open, letting in a gust of cold air and the scent of damp wool. A woman in a long navy coat stepped inside, scanning the store with brisk confidence. She held a list in one hand and a phone in the other, muttering to herself about the time. When she reached aisle 12, she stopped in front of Ed with an expression that said she'd hoped for exactly this. "You the guy everyone keeps telling me about?" she asked. Ed raised an eyebrow. "Depends what they told you." "That you're the only one in this place who explains things in plain English," she said, offering a hand. "Brooke Allen." He shook it. "Ed Palmer, what can I help you with?" She handed him the list. Heater filters, wall anchors, a new door hinge, and a replacement part for a garbage disposal. "I've got a handyman who's great at showing up late and forgetting tools. I figured I'd buy everything myself before he starts improvising again." Ed smiled, scanning her list. "Good idea. Most contractors would love you for saving them the trouble." "Most contractors," she said dryly, "would also love to charge me double for the same parts I can buy myself." He walked her through each item, explaining the differences between brands, what would last, what was worth the extra few dollars, and what wasn't. She asked smart questions, and he appreciated that she actually listened. When he demonstrated how to check whether her garbage disposal issue was a jam or a motor problem, she let out a laugh. "You explain things better than the last 3 professionals I hired," she said. "If you ever get tired of retail, you could make a fortune teaching people how not to break their homes." He chuckled softly. "I've already broken enough things for a lifetime." She tilted her head. "So what brought you here? You retire from something more interesting than hardware." Ed paused, feeling the question press against the sore, quiet place in his chest. "I just needed a change," he said, giving her the simplest version of the truth. "Something to keep me busy." Brooke didn't push. She nodded as if she understood that some stories were earned, not handed out to strangers in hardware aisles. "Well, whatever the reason, you're good at this." When she left with her cart of carefully chosen supplies, she gave him a small wave that lingered longer than a passing acknowledgement. Something about her presence stayed with him after she walked out the door, someone new in this strange new chapter. That evening after closing, Ed helped Tom lock up. The store went quiet in stages, lights dimming, registers powering down, the soft echo of the sliding doors before they shut for the night. Ed stood in aisle 12 for a moment longer, looking at the neatly stocked shelves, the space that had slowly turned into something more than a workplace. It felt like a small world, but it was his. A place where people respected him, where he wasn't in the way, where no one sighed when he asked a question or made space for him out of obligation. On his walk back to the Maple Street house, the cold didn't sting as sharply. His steps were slow but steady. Something was shifting quietly, gently, in a way he hadn't expected. The store wasn't just a job anymore. It was becoming a community, a place where he belonged. Ed was finishing a morning restock in aisle 12 when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He almost ignored it. These days, the few messages he received came from Tom or reminders from the pharmacy. But when he pulled the phone out and saw Jenna's name on the screen, a strange flutter moved through him. She rarely texted first. The message was short. "Saw this? Figured you should too." Below it was a screenshot of Kyle's social media post. Ed stared at it, the bright screen burning into him. Dad wanted his own space, so we helped him move out. Proud of him for taking this step. Family means supporting each other through change. There was a picture attached, Kyle standing on his front porch with a forced half-smile, Madison behind him with a mug in hand, like they were the picture of holiday generosity. No mention of the shouting. No mention of the cold driveway. No mention of Lily crying as he packed what little he had. Just a tidy little narrative for the world to nod at. Ed felt the hit deep in his chest, a dull, familiar ache, but something else sat behind it too. He zoomed in, noticing the way Kyle angled the camera, how Madison's hand rested on Kyle's arm as if in solidarity. How every word of the caption was rehearsed, performed. It wasn't just a lie. It was a story crafted to make them look noble. Ed exhaled slowly, letting the anger rise only halfway before he forced it back down. He typed a quick thank you to Jenna and slid the phone into his pocket, trying to focus on the shelves in front of him. But the words lingered like smoke. When he took his break an hour later, the phone buzzed again, this time a notification from the voice message app. The label read, Lily. He hesitated before pressing play. Her small voice came through in a whisper like she was hiding under blankets. "Hi, Grandpa, I miss you. Mommy said you wanted to leave, but I don't think that's true. I don't understand why you had to go. I keep thinking you're gonna walk in and say you're staying for dinner. I hope you're okay. I love you." Her voice cracked on the last word. Ed swallowed hard, his hand trembling slightly as he replayed the last few seconds. He could hear her confusion, see her sitting in her room, recording the message without her parents' knowledge. That child had always seen more than she was supposed to. He typed slowly, choosing every word with the care of someone walking a tightrope. "Hey, sweetheart, I miss you too. I'm okay, I promise. You didn't do anything wrong. Grown-ups sometimes make decisions that don't feel fair, but I love you very much and I'm always here for you." His finger hovered over the keyboard. He wanted to say more. He wanted to tell her that he hadn't chosen to leave, that her parents hadn't told the truth, that he never would have walked away from her. But she was 9. Her heart was too soft to carry the weight of adult failures. He deleted the extra words, sent the message, and tucked the phone away with a long breath. Later that afternoon, Frank stopped by the store. He leaned against the cart return with a cup of convenience store coffee in hand, the winter wind tugging at his jacket. "You see that garbage your son posted?" he asked, skipping any attempt at subtlety. Ed nodded. Frank took a sip and shook his head. "You gotta set the record straight, man. People around town talk. Don't let him paint you like some lost dog he rescued." Ed tightened his jaw. I'm not getting into a public fight with my own kid. It's not a fight if you're telling the truth, Frank muttered. But Ed only shook his head again. He wasn't ready, not for confrontation, not for another shattering of what little remained between him and Kyle. Silence wasn't acceptance. It was survival, and right now he needed to stay standing. When Ed went in for his next appointment, Dr. Mills noticed something different the moment he walked in. "You look lighter," she observed. "You've got more color in your face." Ed chuckled softly. "Must be the sawdust." She studied him over her glasses. "No, it's the routine, the movement, the people. You're engaging with life again, it shows." He didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded. For years, he'd been shrinking, first after losing his wife, then after retiring, and finally after being pushed out of Kyle's home. For the first time, he was expanding again, even if only by inches. Walking back to the Maple Street house after work, he scrolled through the screenshot one more time. The lie still hurt, but the sting wasn't as sharp. Because while Kyle was busy curating an image for strangers online, Ed was living something real. A job he earned, a community forming around him, a life rebuilt without performance or pretending. Sadness tugged at him, but so did something sturdier. His son could lie. But Ed was finally being honest with others and with himself. And for the first time in a long time, the truth felt like solid ground beneath his feet. The storm rolled in just after sunset, the kind of Ohio winter storm that rattled window panes and made the old Maple Street house creak like it was remembering its age. Wind pushed against the siding and freezing rain tapped steadily on the glass. Ed sat at the small folding table he'd set up in the living room, his makeshift desk, listening to the storm crawl across the neighborhood. The power flickered once, then steadied again. He pulled the old metal filing box toward him, its corners dented from years in closets, attics, and garages. He hadn't planned to go through paperwork tonight, but something about the storm, the emptiness of the house, and the quiet ache he carried pushed him toward the drawer that held pieces of a life he'd almost forgotten he had. He clicked the latch open. Inside was a stack of yellowing envelopes, outdated insurance forms, tax documents, a few letters his wife had kept. Underneath them, at the bottom, lay the folder he hadn't touched in years, his property papers. He slid it out carefully, brushing dust from the edges. He unfolded the deed first. His name stared back at him next to his wife's, the ink slightly faded but still clear. He ran a thumb over it, remembering the day they'd sig. Netted both of them younger, full of plans, imagining a life built inside these walls. The title documents were next, along with appraisal reports over the years. One page caught his eye, a note scribbled by a realtor friend estimating the current value of the property. The number was higher than he expected, much higher. He leaned back in the chair, letting that settle. This house, this old place with its peeling paint and creaking floors, was worth more than he'd realized. More than Kyle had ever realized, too, judging by how casually he'd always spoken about it. Memories surfaced, Kyle walking through the house years ago, hands in his pockets, saying, "When this place is finally mine, I'm gonna knock down that wall and open up the kitchen." Another time, when Ed was recovering from a surgery, Kyle joked, "Don't worry, Dad, I'll take good care of the place when it's my turn." It had always been assumed, expected, as if the house were already half his, just waiting for paperwork to catch up. Ed sat with that for a long moment, the storm outside growing louder. He thought back to the night he'd been pushed out, the cold driveway, Kyle's voice sharp and impatient. "You need to leave. Today." How quickly his son had dismissed him. How easily he'd treated him like an inconvenience instead of a father. The idea entered Ed's mind gently at first, almost shy, like a question he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. What if the house didn't go to Kyle? He stared at the deed again. For the first time, he felt the weight of ownership not as responsibility, but as something solid, something powerful, something that was still his to decide. He whispered into the quiet room. Maybe it's time things didn't go the way he expects. The thought didn't bring anger. It brought clarity. The next morning, Ed arrived at work early, his footsteps still stiff from a night spent on the hard floor. The storm had passed, leaving the sky bright and painfully clear. Customers trickled in with lists of things the storm had broken: shingles, gutters, cracked window seals. A normal winter aftermath. Around lunchtime, the sliding doors opened and in walked Brooke Allen again, wrapped in her navy coat, a stack of folders tucked under her arm. She smiled when she saw Ed, as if she genuinely meant it. "Back in my favorite aisle," she said. "I swear if you ever quit, this place is doomed." He chuckled, though his mind was still tangled in last night's thoughts. "What brings you in this time?" "Disaster," she said. "My office heater died mid-meeting. I need parts fast before my clients start thinking I'm running a freezer instead of a law practice." "Let's see what we can do," he replied. As he walked her through the options, she mentioned casually, "I work mostly in estate planning and elder law. Lots of families, lots of messy situations." She rolled her eyes playfully. "People behave strangely when they assume they're about to inherit something." Ed stopped mid-step, her words hitting closer than she could possibly know. Brooke noticed his pause. "You okay?" He hesitated, weighing the words that wanted to come out. Then, quietly, so quietly she leaned in to hear, he asked, "What happens if someone assumes they're getting something you never promised them?" Brooke's expression shifted instantly, not nosy, not intrusive, but focused, professional, understanding. "Well," she said softly, "assumptions don't hold up in court. Only documents do, and intentions, your intentions." Ed nodded slowly, the truth of that sinking in deep. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "If you want to talk for real, call me. We can make sure what you want, not what others expect, actually happens." Ed took the card, his hand steady, though everything inside him trembled with a new kind of resolve. As Brooke walked away, her heels echoing down the aisle, Ed stared at the card in his palm. The idea from the night before wasn't just a thought anymore. It was becoming a possibility. And for the first time, he felt the shift, subtle but undeniable. Control was moving back to him. Ed spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting back to the business card in his pocket. It felt heavier than it should have, like a key to a door he wasn't sure he had the right to open. When Tom told him he could clock out a little early, Ed hesitated only a moment before saying he had an errand to run. Truth was, if he went home, sat on that cold floor and let doubt settle in again, he might never make the call. Brooke's office was tucked inside a renovated brick building on the quieter side of Main Street. The lights were still on, warm and steady against the evening dark. When Ed stepped inside, he wasn't sure if he expected her to send him away or tell him he was overreacting. Instead, she greeted him with a soft, knowing smile. "You came," she said, motioning toward a chair across from her desk. "Good." Ed sat down slowly, hands clasped tight. I'm not sure what I'm doing," he admitted. "This is all new territory." "Most people don't know where to start," Brooke said. "Take your time." So he did. For the first time since Christmas, he let the story spill out, not the polished version he told strangers, not the watered-down version he fed Dr. Mills, but the truth. Being shoved out on Christmas morning. The motel. The empty house. Kyle's post online twisting the story. The assumptions he'd made for years about the Maple Street house. The way his son had spoken about it as if it already belonged to him. Brooke didn't interrupt. She didn't pity him either. She listened with the calm focus of someone who'd heard every version of family betrayal but still treated each story as its own. When he finally finished, she sat back in her chair, folding her hands. "Ed," she said gently, "you are under no obligation, none, to leave anything to someone who mistreats you. That includes children. That includes anyone who believes entitlement is the same as love." He blinked. "I always assumed that's what parents do." That's what good parents do, and you are one. But good parents don't reward cruelty. They protect what matters. They protect the next generation. They protect their own dignity. Her words struck something deep inside him, something that had been bruised for years without him noticing. Brooke turned to her computer and pulled up a copy of his existing will. He'd brought the paperwork from home, unsure why but grateful now that he had. She scanned it, eyes narrowing slightly. As it's written now, your estate splits evenly between Kyle and Rachel, with Kyle receiving the house outright if anything happens to you. Ed felt the blood drain from his face. Outright, even if, after everything, he threw me out. That's what the current document says. He stared at his hands, stunned. He hadn't expected the reality to hit this hard. He'd always imagined the will as something distant, something that mattered someday. But now it felt like a loaded gun someone else was holding. Brooke continued, changing this isn't difficult. You have full control. You can protect your assets. You can ensure any inheritance goes where respect and care have actually been shown. Ed swallowed, eyes still lowered. What does changing it look like? Brooke slid a fresh set of papers toward him. We revise your will. You decide who receives the house. You decide what legacy you leave. You decide how this story ends. There was no rush in her voice, no pressure, just clarity. Ed thought of Jenna, who checked on him without asking for anything. Lily, who sent secret voice messages and whispered, "I miss you." He thought of how they had shown him more love in months than Kyle had in years. And he thought of his wife, how she'd always wanted a scholarship fund in her name, something small, something meaningful, something that lived on beyond them. He nodded slowly. Okay, let's do it. With Brooke walking him through each page, Ed signed new documents naming Jenna and Lily as his primary beneficiaries. He left a modest amount for Rachel, enough to acknowledge the relationship without rewarding distance. He created a small scholarship fund in his wife's name for girls pursuing trade school programs. And Kyle received something symbolic rather than substantial, enough to show fairness, but nowhere near the reward he had always assumed would be his. The pen trembled in Ed's hand as he finished the last signature, not from fear, from something else. Something that felt like reclaiming a piece of himself he'd given away without realizing it. Brooke gathered the papers with the professionalism of someone handling something sacred. "It's done," she said softly. "Your wishes are now protected." Ed stood, feeling strangely taller, stronger. When he stepped outside, the evening air hit his face with a sharpness that felt cleansing. Main Street was quiet, shops closed, lights dimmed, a few cars passing slowly. He tucked his hands into his jacket pockets, gripping the edges of the paperwork folder like a lifeline. For the first time since Christmas morning, he felt like he wasn't just reacting to life. He was shaping it. As he walked back toward the Maple Street house, the streetlights reflecting off thin patches of ice, the truth settled into him with unexpected steadiness. He had taken a countermove. A deliberate, undeniable countermove in a game he hadn't realized he'd been forced into. And for once, he wasn't the one being pushed out. He was the one drawing the lines. For a while, Ed thought he could slip back into town quietly, unnoticed except for the regulars who came through aisle 12. But small towns have a way of carrying whispers, passing them along like wind through bare branches. And soon enough, people began to talk. They talked at the diner over morning coffee, at the hardware store checkout line, at church halls and neighborhood sidewalks. "Ed's back on Maple Street," someone said. "He looks good, looks busy." Another voice chimed in. "He's working over at the hardware store now. Seems happier than he's been in years." No one meant harm. It was just conversation, simple, drifting chatter. But eventually, as chatter often does, it reached someone who wasn't ready to hear it. Kyle. A mutual acquaintance from his gym stopped him one afternoon, towel slung over his shoulder, casual as ever. "Hey, I ran into your dad the other day," he said. "Didn't know he was back in town. Seems happier. Said he's working now, right? Good for him. Kyle forced a stiff smile, but the words hit harder than he let on. Yeah, he replied flatly. He needed some independence. The acquaintance nodded and moved on, but Kyle lingered, staring at the gym floor as if the answer were hidden in the glossy tiles. Independence. That's what he'd been telling himself since Christmas morning, that his father needed space, that asking him to leave was for the best, that they'd helped him. But the truth, sharp and uncomfortable, pressed against his chest. If his father seemed happier out of his home than in it, what did that say about him? Before that thought could fully form, he buried it. He always buried things that didn't serve the narrative he wanted. He's fine, he told himself. He needed this. Then he left the gym, shaking off the unease like cold rain. Back home, Madison was fussing with a stack of mail when he walked in. She noticed his expression immediately. What's wrong? People are talking, he said, about my dad, saying he's back at the house, saying he's working again. She paused, her eyes narrowing not with concern for Ed but with something more calculated, self-preservation. Is that bad? She asked carefully. It looks weird, Kyle muttered, like we kicked him out. Madison's jaw tightened. She didn't like anything that threatened the image she curated, the perfect family with perfect decisions and perfect explanations. Then maybe, she said slowly, we should invite him over, just once, so people see we're still a close family. Kyle blinked. You want him here? I want us to look like we care, she corrected, smoothing a wrinkle in her blouse. A simple visit will fix the story. It doesn't mean we have to go back to how things were. He nodded, not fully convinced but too tired to argue. Their image mattered to Madison, sometimes more than the truth itself. Later that evening, after pacing the living room twice, Kyle finally typed out a message. The words were short, stiff, clearly rewritten multiple times. Lily misses you. Come by sometime. He hovered a moment, then hit send. 2 miles away, Ed was sitting at his small kitchen counter, eating leftover stew from a can when his phone buzzed. The message appeared on the screen like a ghost, familiar but without warmth. He read it once, then again. The words were polite but hollow, a performance, not an invitation, a gesture designed to be seen, not felt. His heart tugged at the mention of Lily. God, he missed her drawings taped to the fridge, her questions, her laughter. But the rest, the come by sometime, felt like a doorway back into a place he had barely escaped. A place where his presence was a burden, where he was always in the way, where the smallest mistake became an excuse. He set the phone down and rested his hands on the worn surface of the counter. Going back meant reopening a wound still trying to heal. It meant stepping into their version of events, letting them pretend Christmas morning hadn't happened the way he remembered. He wasn't sure he could survive that. He closed his eyes, breathing slowly, steadying himself the way he'd learned to do at the hardware store when customers overwhelmed him. When he opened his eyes again, the decision settled quietly in his chest. He typed back a simple, careful reply. Tell Lily I love her. I'm glad she's doing well. He didn't add anything else. He didn't say he would come. He didn't commit to stepping back into a narrative rewritten without him. He set the phone aside and let the quiet fill the small house. The wind brushed against the windows, and somewhere down the street a dog barked, the sound echoing faintly. He missed his granddaughter, yes, he always would. But he finally understood something that had taken him months of pain to learn. Sometimes choosing yourself wasn't selfish. It was survival. And for now, he needed to stay where he was safe, even if that meant staying away. It had been weeks since Kyle's stiff message, weeks Ed had spent building shelves, lifting boxes, and learning the rhythms of the hardware store. Weeks that gave him enough distance to breathe again. Then one evening, as he sat on the Maple Street couch he'd finally bought secondhand, his phone buzzed with a notification that made his heart ache. A voice message from Lily. He pressed play, her small voice spilling into the quiet living room. "Grandpa, I have a school recital next Friday. I'm playing the violin. I really want you to come. Please, I'll look for you." Just like that, the wall he'd worked so hard to build cracked open. There were things he could deny himself, old memories, old expectations, but he couldn't deny her. Not the child who had clung to him while her parents pushed him out the door. Not the little girl who whispered the truth even when the adults around her bent it. So on Friday evening, he put on his cleanest shirt, smoothed down the front, and walked into the elementary school cafeteria turned auditorium. Folding chairs lined the room in uneven rows. Parents jostled for seats closer to the front, the air packed with nervous energy and winter coats. Ed slipped into the back row, the place where people who didn't want to be noticed usually sat. He didn't want attention, he just wanted to be there. When the students walked onto the stage, tiny violins, shiny shoes, anxious smiles, Lily scanned the crowd with wide, searching eyes. For a moment she looked scared she wouldn't find him. Then her gaze reached the back row. Her whole face lit up. She lifted her hand just slightly, the smallest wave, meant only for him. Ed felt something tighten in his chest, something painful and warm at the same time. He nodded back, a quiet hello across a crowded room. The music began. It was squeaky, off-tempo in places, earnest in others, exactly what elementary school performances always were. But to Ed it was beautiful. He watched Lily straighten her posture, saw the pride in the way she held her bow. She wasn't playing for the audience or the teacher. She was playing for the man in the back row. When the recital ended, families flooded the aisles, congratulating their children. Ed waited until the crowd thinned, not wanting to make a scene. But he didn't have to look far. Lily barreled rough 2 families to reach him. "Grandpa," she cried, wrapping her arms around him so tightly he almost lost his balance. He laughed softly, holding her close. "You were wonderful, best performance of the night." She pulled back, grinning from ear to ear. "I saw you right away. I told Mommy you would come." At the mention of her mother, Ed's smile softened. Right on cue, Kyle and Madison approached, both wearing the same polite, strained expression. They looked surprised, performatively surprised, the kind of surprised meant for an audience. "Dad," Kyle said, almost too brightly, "we didn't know you'd be here." "I came for Lily," Ed replied plainly. Madison added a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, it's good you two got to see each other. Everything has been calmer since our hard but mutual decision after Christmas." Ed studied her face for a moment, noting how easily she rearranged the truth to suit the version of events she preferred. He wasn't angry, not anymore, just tired of the performance. "Interesting way to remember it," he said gently. Not confrontational, not sarcastic, just honest. Kyle shifted uncomfortably, pretending to check his phone. Madison cleared her throat, as if hoping to move the moment along. Lily held onto Ed's arm, refusing to let go. "Grandpa's coming to the next recital too," she declared with the certainty only a child could muster. Ed squeezed her hand. "If you want me there, sweetheart, I'll be there." Kyle didn't argue. Madison didn't correct Lily. They simply stood there, caught in the truth their daughter stated so confidently, a truth they couldn't spin. After a few more minutes of small talk stretched thin by tension, Ed said goodbye and walked Lily to her parents' car. She hugged him again, just as tightly as before climbing into the back seat. He watched them drive off, the taillights fading into the winter night. The walk back to the Maple Street house was cold but peaceful. Snow crunched under his boots, the kind of quiet he didn't fear anymore. When he stepped inside his home, he exhaled slowly, letting the warmth settle around him. He hadn't gone for Kyle. He hadn't gone for Madison. He'd gone for the one person who truly needed him, and who had needed him all along. And tonight that was enough. Winter dragged into February with the kind of gray that seeped into everything, Sky, streets, moods. Even Kyle felt it. He sat at his office desk staring at an email-marked company announcement, his stomach tightening as he read it for the third time. Due to economic shifts, restructuring may include departmental layoffs. The words pulsed like a warning siren. Kyle leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Sales had been slow, and he'd missed last quarter's targets. He'd known pressure was coming, but not like this. Not with layoffs hanging over his head like a guillotine. That evening, he walked into his house distracted, shoulders tight, barely registering Madison's questions about dinner. When she finally pressed him, he handed her his phone with the email open. She scanned it, her lips thinning into a line. "So it's real?" she asked. "It looks like it," Kyle muttered. "They haven't said who's on the list yet, but my department," he shook his head. "It's not good." Madison crossed her arms, anxiety sharp in her voice. "What are we supposed to do if you get cut? The mortgage, the bills, Lily's school fees." "I know," Kyle snapped, louder than he meant to. Then he softened, sighing. "Look, if things go bad, at least Dad's house is there someday. It's security," he always said. Madison fixed him with a pointed look. "Kyle, you need to make sure his will is in order. You know how unpredictable things have been with him lately." His face flushed, but her tone framed it as concern as practicality. She always wrapped her pressure in the language of care. "I'm not saying rush anything," she continued. "I'm saying be smart, responsible. He's not getting younger." Kyle nodded slowly. She was right, he told himself. She usually was. His father had responsibilities too, family responsibilities, and Kyle still believed deep down that his father's assets would naturally flow to him. Why wouldn't they? That's how it was supposed to work. Meanwhile, miles away at the hardware store, the world looked very different. Ed was stocking a shelf of drill bits when Tom walked by with his clipboard, stopping just long enough to tap the edge of the shelf in approval. "You've got the cleanest aisle in the store," Tom said, "and customers keep praising you. You want more hours. I can give them to you. No pressure, only if you want." Ed felt a warmth bloom in his chest, quiet, steady, deeply unfamiliar after years of feeling like an afterthought. "Yeah," he said, "I'll take them. As many as you can give." Tom smiled. "Good, you're a hell of an asset around here." The words traveled with Ed the entire shift, staying with him even as the store grew busier, and his feet started to AC. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be useful, not tolerated, not managed, but valued. Financially, things were improving, slowly but unmistakably. The extra hours meant the heat stayed on at Maple Street without worry. They meant groceries didn't feel like a math equation anymore. They meant breathing room. Emotionally, he felt stronger too. The ache of Christmas morning still lived under the surface, but it no longer dictated every day. Work, community, purpose, those things gave him something his family hadn't in years. Later that week, Ed had a check-in appointment with Brooke to finalize one last administrative detail on the revised will. Her office felt warmer this time, familiar, even comforting. As they reviewed the documents, Brooke glanced up at him with a small smile. "Everything is official now," she said. "Your wishes are protected. No one can change this or challenge it unless you choose to." Ed nodded, exhaling slowly. "Feels like I can finally breathe." "You made the right decision," Brooke replied. "Family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by care, by who shows up." Those words stayed with him long after he left. Across town, Kyle and Madison sat at their kitchen table, poring over spreadsheets and bank statements, the numbers tightening like a noose around their plans. Madison chewed on her thumbnail before saying, "Your dad's always helped when things got bad. He won't let us drown." Kyle nodded with confidence born from decades of habit. "He's my father. At the end of the day, he'll always take care of me. That's what he does." He didn't say it arrogantly, just with certainty, as if the universe had written it into some unspoken rule. But that rule had changed. He didn't know it yet. Madison didn't know it. No one in that house did. The future they were counting on had already shifted quietly, locked inside a legal document they'd never seen, shaped by a man they dismissed too quickly. And while Kyle clung to the belief that everything would fall into place the way it always had, Ed walked home from work that night with steady footsteps, a growing sense of control, and a truth that was beginning to settle deep in his bones. For the first time in years, his life and his legacy belonged entirely to him. It was a busy afternoon at the hardware store, the kind where every aisle buzzed with customers looking for quick fixes and winter repairs. Ed stood in aisle 12 beside a middle-aged man who was comparing two different brands of space heater parts, explaining the pros and cons with the calm, patient tone he'd become known for. "So this one'll last you longer," Ed said, tapping the box lightly. "Might cost a little more up front, but you won't be back here in 3 weeks." The customer nodded appreciatively. "Thanks, Ed, you always know your stuff." Ed smiled, quietly proud but never boastful. Helping people had become the best part of his day. Then he heard a voice he hadn't expected to hear inside these walls. Sharp, tense, and already carrying frustration. "Dad." Ed's chest tightened. He turned slowly. Kyle was striding down the aisle with the hurried, determined steps of someone ready to fix something, or break something. His coat was half-zipped, and there was a frantic energy in his eyes that made the other customers step subtly aside. "Dad, we need to talk about plans," Kyle said loudly, loud enough for nearby shoppers to glance over. Ed felt the heat rise in his face. This was not the place, not the setting, not the moment. Customers stood only a few feet away. Tom was at the end of the aisle restocking shelves. Ed kept his composure, but his jaw tightened. He lifted a gentle hand toward the customer he'd been helping. "If you need anything else, I'll be back in a few minutes." Then he turned to Tom. "Mind if I take a quick break?" Tom looked between them, instantly understanding this wasn't a casual conversation. "Go ahead," he said quietly. Ed nodded and motioned for Kyle to follow him. They walked toward the sliding doors, the heavy scent of sawdust fading as the cold afternoon air replaced it. Outside, the parking lot was nearly empty, gray clouds hanging low like they were waiting for something to fall. "What are you doing here, Kyle?" Ed asked, crossing his arms, not defensive but guarded. Kyle exhaled sharply as if he'd been holding in frustration for too long. "I've been meaning to come by for weeks, Dad. We need to talk about the house, about future living arrangements. Things have been rough at work. There's talk of layoffs, and if anything happens, I need to know." Ed cut him a look, a quiet, steady, unmistakably firm look that stopped Kyle mid-sentence. "Security," Kyle continued, his voice cracking. "I need to know the house will be there. I mean, it always has been part of the plan, you know that." Ed's heart pounded with a mix of disbelief and calm fury. The audacity was almost breathtaking, not because Kyle wanted help, but because he felt entitled to it. "Art of the plan," Ed repeated softly. Kyle ran a hand through his hair. "Dad, come on, we've talked about this. You always said the house would go to me, that one day." "I said," Ed interrupted gently but firmly, "that I wanted my family cared for." "And I'm your family," Kyle insisted. "And I'm drowning right now. The thought of knowing the house is going to be mine, it keeps me steady. It gives me something to hold on to when everything else feels like it's falling apart." Ed took a slow breath, the winter air stinging his lungs. He looked at his son, not the boy he'd raised, but the man shaped by entitlement, fear, and expectations Ed never meant to plant. Then he said the truth Kyle had never prepared himself to hear. "You threw me out of your home on Christmas." Kyle froze. Ed continued, his voice level but carrying a lifetime of hurt. "You pushed me out with nowhere to go, on a holiday, like I was a burden you couldn't wait to unload." He shook his head slowly, eyes unwavering. What made you think you still had a claim on mine? The words hit like a brick wall. Kyle's mouth opened slightly, no sound coming out. He blinked hard as if trying to process something that had never occurred to him, that his father could see through him, could take action, could change the rules. Dad, I didn't think. You didn't, Ed said. That's the problem. Wind brushed between them, cold and sharp. Kyle looked suddenly unsure, smaller somehow. For the first time, he saw that his father wasn't standing in this parking lot as someone grateful for scraps of attention. He was standing as a man who'd rebuilt himself. Ed uncrossed his arms. You build your security now, just like I did. Kyle swallowed, his throat bobbing, eyes darting as if searching for the script he'd always relied on. But there was none this time. Ed turned toward the store door, not angry, just done. I have to get back to work, he said. Take care of yourself, Kyle. And with that, he walked back inside, leaving Kyle standing in the cold with more uncertainty than he'd ever faced in his life. Uncertainty he could no longer bury under assumptions. Aisle 12 was waiting. And so was a life that no longer revolved around someone else's plans. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in early spring, one of those deceptively warm days when winter pretends it's finally done. Ed was at the hardware store, lifting a box of tile adhesive from a lower shelf, when a sharp pressure shot through his chest and up into his jaw. Not agony, but a tightening, a warning. He set the box down, steadying himself against the metal shelf as the world briefly tilted. Tom noticed immediately. Ed, sit down now. Ed insisted he was fine, but Tom wouldn't hear it. Within minutes, an ambulance had arrived, and Ed found himself being wheeled out past aisles he'd come to think of as home. The paramedics said it was likely angina, nothing catastrophic, but not nothing either. They wanted him under observation overnight, just to be safe. In the hospital room, as machines hummed and monitors blinked soft green pulses, Ed lay staring at the ceiling. A strange calm washed over him. Not fear, not resignation, just an awareness of how thin the line was between a normal day and a day that changed everything. Word got out quicker than he expected. Kyle and Madison burst into the hospital room just after dusk, breathless and wide-eyed. Their panic wasn't subtle. Kyle rushed to the bedside with a trembling urgency Ed hadn't seen even on Christmas morning. Dad, oh my God, are you okay? Kyle demanded, voice cracking. Madison hovered behind him, gripping her purse strap so tightly her knuckles whitened. They said you were brought in by ambulance, she said. We thought, well, we were worried. Ed could see it in their faces. The fear wasn't purely about him. It was mixed with something else, something sharper, something calculating. He offered a small smile. I'm all right, just a scare. They're keeping me overnight as a precaution. Kyle sank into the chair beside the bed, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for years. Dad, you can't do that to us. Ed didn't respond. He didn't trust himself to. And then, almost like fate had a sense of timing, the door opened again. Brooke stepped in quietly, carrying a manila folder and a cup of vending machine tea. The room shifted instantly. Kyle's eyes narrowed, Madison's posture tightened. Ed felt a surprising wave of relief. Hey, Ed, Brooke said, her tone professional but warm. You gave us all quite a scare. Kyle blinked at her. Us. I'm Ed's attorney, Brooke replied, and a friend. Madison exchanged a look with Kyle, suspicion flaring behind her eyes. Brooke moved to the side of the bed. I brought the paperwork you asked for last month, she said softly. Figured since you're here, it's a good time to verify a couple signatures. She lowered her voice, almost whispering. Anything for your beneficiaries should be up to date. The word beneficiaries might as well have detonated in the room. Kyle jerked upright. Beneficiaries, what beneficiaries, what's going on? Brooke straightened, calm but firm. This is private, Kyle. The hell it is, Kyle snapped. He's my father. Madison stepped closer to him, touching his arm, eyes gleaming with the fear she tried to disguise as concern. "We just want to know what's happening," she said sweetly. Ed finally spoke, his voice steady, surprisingly strong. "Kyle, sit down." It wasn't loud, but it carried authority. Kyle obeyed without thinking. Ed took a breath. "I updated my will months ago." Kyle's brow furrowed, confusion splintering into disbelief. "Why? Why would you do that without telling me?" "Because," Ed said, "I made the changes after you threw me out of your home on Christmas." The room went still. Even the monitors seemed to quiet. Kyle shook his head, stunned. "Dad, you didn't have to. I mean, that wasn't Dad, the house. What about the house?" Ed met his son's eyes without flinching. "The house is no longer for you to count on. I protected it, and I protected Lily, and Jenna, and a fund in your mother's name." Kyle stared at him, speechless. Brooke stepped in, her voice controlled. "Ed's new will designates Jenna and Lily as primary beneficiaries. There is also a scholarship fund honoring his late wife. Kyle, your portion remains symbolic, by Ed's choice." Madison inhaled sharply. "Symbolic? What does that even mean? Are you saying—" "It means," Ed said, cutting her off, "that I left you something small, but not the house, not the inheritance you expected, not a reward for the way you treated me." Kyle's face flushed red, humiliation and disbelief tangling across his expression. "Dad, this isn't fair. I'm your son. You always said—" "I said," Ed interrupted, "that I wanted to take care of my family, the family that took care of me, the family that showed kindness, respect." Kyle's mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time, he couldn't talk his way out of the corner he'd backed himself into. Madison stepped forward, voice tight. "You're punishing us." "No," Ed said quietly. "I'm protecting myself and the people who still care." Kyle's eyes glistened, not with sadness but with the dawning realization that this wasn't temporary. This wasn't a mood or a phase. This was permanent, legally permanent, signed, sealed, locked. "Dad," he whispered, shaking his head slowly, "you can't undo this. You—" "I already did," Ed replied, "months ago." Kyle sank back into the chair, stunned. For the first time in his adult life, consequences, real consequences, had arrived, and he could do nothing to rewrite them. Brooke closed the folder gently. "Ed's wishes stand. They're protected." Silence settled like dust. Ed breathed deeply, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: control, ownership, justice without cruelty. Kyle looked at him again, but this time with something rawer than anger, something closer to fear. For the first time, he understood. His actions had cost him something he would never get back. And no apology, not now, not later, could undo it. For a full minute after Ed's revelation, the hospital room was silent, thick, stunned, breathless. Then, like a dam cracking, Kyle's emotions burst through all at once. "You're vindictive," he snapped, rising from the chair so fast it scraped across the floor. "You're punishing me for one bad day, one mistake, and you're seriously okay with taking everything away after everything I've done for you." Ed didn't flinch. "You threw me out," he said quietly, "on Christmas." But Kyle wasn't listening. He was spiraling. "You're ungrateful," he spat, twisting the story with the ease of someone who'd been rewriting narratives his whole life. "I took you in. I fed you. I made room for you in my home. And now you go behind my back, change everything, and act like I'm the villain." Madison stepped forward, face flushed with outrage. "Do you know what you've done to us?" she demanded. "We made sacrifices to help you. We rearranged our life for you. And now you're destroying our family's future over hurt feelings." Jenna, who had arrived quietly minutes earlier and stood in the doorway unnoticed, finally stepped into the room. "Sacrifices," she repeated, her voice tight with disbelief. "You kicked him out with his suitcase on Christmas morning. Don't talk about sacrifices." Kyle whipped around. "Stay out of this, Jenna. You don't know the whole story." "Oh, I know enough," she shot back. "Dad didn't tell me everything, but Lily did. She told me how he cried. She told me how you screamed. She told me how fast you shut the door. Don't pretend you were helping him." The air in the room went razor sharp. Kyle's eyes darted toward Madison, desperate for backup, but Madison's jaw clenched, no longer confident in her own script. Before anyone could speak again, a soft, trembling voice came from behind Jenna. "Stop it." Everyone turned. Lily stood there, her violin case still. Elle slung over her shoulder, tears streaking down her cheeks. She must have followed Madison and Kyle into the hospital, but no one had noticed. She looked so small in the doorway, hands shaking, eyes wide with fear. "Just stop fighting about money," she pleaded, voice cracking. "You're scaring Grandpa, you're scaring me. Why is it always about money with you too?" Kyle took a step toward her, his anger collapsing into guilt. "Lily, sweetheart, this is complicated. We're just trying to—" "No," she cried, stepping back. "You're not trying to help him, you're trying to take things from him. Grandpa isn't a wallet, he's Grandpa." Her words hit harder than any argument Ed could have made. Madison swallowed hard, looking away. Kyle froze, unable to form a single excuse. Ed's heart broke a little seeing his granddaughter caught in the center of their ugliness. He lifted a hand, summoning what little strength he had. "Everyone needs to leave," he said gently but firmly. "Now." Kyle stared at him, stunned. "Dad." "I said leave," Ed repeated. "I need quiet, I need space, and Lily shouldn't be in the middle of this." Jenna stepped forward and put her arm around Lily, guiding her away from the chaos. Madison opened her mouth as if to protest, but Kyle stopped her with a weak shake of his head. Defeated, humiliated, and shaken, they followed Jenna and Lily out into the hallway. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Finally silence. Ed sank back into his pillows, heart heavy but uncluttered. For the first time since Christmas, the truth had been spoken aloud, not in anger, not in secret, but in the presence of everyone who had twisted it. He stared at the ceiling as the monitors continued their steady beeping. Money. That was what had exposed everyone's core. It hadn't created greed or selfishness. It had revealed what was already there. Kyle's entitlement. Madison's obsession with appearances. Their belief that Ed existed to support them, financially or otherwise, even after they'd cast him aside. He closed his eyes and took a slow, grounding breath. Revenge wasn't loud or dramatic like in the movies. It wasn't shouting, or slamming doors, or throwing back the same cruelty he'd received. No. Revenge, real revenge, was refusing to be used. Refusing to play the part they'd written for him. Refusing to be the man who quietly accepted mistreatment because family was supposed to excuse everything. By changing his will, by protecting the Maple Street house, by choosing who truly deserved a legacy, he hadn't destroyed anything. He'd simply stopped allowing them to take. Hours later, when he was finally discharged and a cab dropped him at the front of his home, he stepped inside and let the familiar quiet settle around him. The house, once a lonely refuge, now felt like a sanctuary, a place reclaimed, not abandoned. He hung his jacket by the door, touched the frame of the hallway picture of his late wife, and whispered into the stillness. "It's done." Not with bitterness, not with triumph. With peace. His revenge wasn't the reduced inheritance. It wasn't the shock on Kyle's face. It wasn't even the truth finally laid bare. It was knowing he had drawn a boundary that could never be crossed again. And for the first time in a long time, he felt untouchable. The first morning back at the hardware store felt different, not in the physical sense, though Ed's body still moved slower after the hospital stay, but in the way the air seemed to warm around him the moment he stepped through the sliding doors. The familiar scent of wood, metal, and fresh cardboard met him like an old friend. He had barely taken 3 steps inside before Tom spotted him from across the store. "There he is," Tom called out, louder than necessary, back from scaring us all half to death." A couple of employees looked up from stocking shelves and waved. One of the younger workers, the same kid who had once teased Ed about lifting boxes, hurried over and gave him a clumsy but sincere pat on the shoulder. "Good to see you, man. We missed you." Ed chuckled softly. "I was only gone a few days." "Yeah, well," Tom said, crossing his arms with a smirk, "you're the only one who knows where half the stuff in aisle 12 actually belongs. We were lost without you." The warmth of their welcome settled around Ed like a blanket he didn't realize he'd needed. There was no pity in their voices, no forced compassion, just genuine relief and appreciation, something he rarely felt at home with Kyle. As the morning picked up, customers filtered in with their usual questions. But today, something unexpected happened. A woman pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies paused when she saw him. "Oh my goodness," she said, hand flying to her chest. "You're back. I heard you were in the hospital. Are you all right?" Ed blinked, surprised. "I'm fine," he said with a small smile, "just a little scare." "Well, don't do that again," she scolded lightly. "You're the only one who can explain half this stuff." A man from the lumber aisle made his way over next. "I had no idea you were out sick. Glad you're back, buddy." A retired couple waved from the paint section. Another customer shouted, "Hey, Ed, don't go disappearing again." By noon, Ed lost count of how many people had asked about him. Not out of obligation, not out of politeness, but because they actually noticed his absence, because he mattered there. The hardware store wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fancy. But it gave him more community, more connection than the home he'd once shared with his son. That realization hit him gently at first, then with deeper weight as the hours passed. Around lunch, Tom tapped him on the shoulder and jerked his head toward the break room. "Got a minute?" Ed followed, expecting a conversation about scheduling or inventory. Instead, Tom leaned against the counter and crossed his arms, face softening. "I've been thinking," Tom began. "You've been doing great work. Hell, better than half the guys half your age. I want to offer you something." Ed raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "A permanent position," Tom said simply. "As long as you want it, no pressure, no strings. You don't even need to do full time if you don't want. I want you here. The team wants you here." Ed looked down, emotion settling in his throat like a heavy stone. "Tom, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," Tom replied. "That's all." Ed nodded. "All right, I'll think about it." He didn't need to think, not really. The answer was already forming in the quiet space of his chest. But he appreciated the way Tom offered it, not as charity, not as a favor, but as recognition of value. When his shift finally ended, Tom told him to meet everyone near aisle 3 before he left. Ed followed the instructions, confused, until he rounded the corner and saw the small group gathered around a folding table. There, sitting proudly in the center, was a sheet cake decorated with blue icing. "Happy 1-year mark, Ed." He froze. Tom clapped him on the back. "You didn't think we were gonna let this milestone slip by, did you?" The younger employees cheered. Someone handed him a paper plate and a plastic fork. Even customers nearby paused to look, smiling as if they'd stumbled onto something worth witnessing. Ed stared at the cake for a moment, trying to process it. A year. A whole year since the day he stood outside those glass doors, uncertain if anyone inside would take a chance on him. A year since he'd started rebuilding piece by piece. And here he was, celebrated, appreciated, wanted. He cut the fur. Since slice, hands slightly shaking, not from age or nerves, but from something that felt dangerously close to gratitude. As they ate, someone joked, "You're practically a celebrity around here, Ed." Another said, "We should put your picture up in aisle 12. Ask Ed for advice." Laughter filled the space, warm and unforced. The kind of laughter that made a person feel included instead of tolerated. Ed didn't say much. He didn't need to. He looked around at the faces, young, old, familiar kind, and felt something quietly powerful click into place inside him. He was valued here, not because of what he owned, not because of what he could provide, not because of obligation or family expectation. He was valued because of who he was. Later, walking home under the fading evening sky, Ed felt a lightness he hadn't known in years. The Maple Street house didn't feel empty tonight. It felt like a home waiting for him to return. He set his hat on the counter, exhaled deeply, and let the truth settle fully in his chest. This job didn't just pay bills. It rebuilt him. It restored him. It saved his life. The call came on a Tuesday evening just as Ed was rinsing out a mug from his late-night tea. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet he'd grown used to, comfortable, steady. When his phone buzzed and he saw Kyle on the screen, his first instinct was hesitation. He almost let it ring out. Almost. But something, curiosity maybe, or the faint hope that things could be different, made him swipe to answer. "Dad," Kyle's voice was subdued, stripped of its usual sharpness. "Can we talk, not over the phone, in person?" Ed gripped the edge of the counter. "About what?" I need to talk to you, privately." A pause, "Please." The last word landed softer than the rest. Ed thought for several seconds, the silence stretching across the line. Then he agreed. They chose a small local park, the one with the duck pond Ed had taken both kids to when they were little. By the time Ed arrived, the streetlights had flickered on, their halos glowing through the early spring dusk. Kyle was already sitting on a bench, hunched forward, elbows on his knees. He looked older than his 35 years, tired, worn, the bravado drained from him. Ed approached slowly. "You wanted to talk." Kyle nodded and motioned to the empty side of the bench. Ed sat, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a moment neither spoke. The only sound was the distant paddling of ducks and the soft hum of traffic on the main road. Finally Kyle exhaled. "I've been struggling," he said, "at work, at home, with everything." Ed didn't respond. He wanted Kyle to say the next part himself. Kyle rubbed his palms together, staring at the ground. "I haven't been sleeping. I keep replaying Christmas in my head, the things I said, the look on your face. I thought I was doing the right thing at the time, I really did. But now," his voice cracked, "now I can't believe I let it happen." Ed's chest tightened. Hearing it out loud, finally, without excuses or rewritten versions, stirred something he wasn't ready to name. Kyle swallowed hard. "I've been scared at work. I thought I might lose my job, and when I heard about the will, I panicked. That's not an excuse. I'm just trying to explain." He dragged a shaky hand over his face. "I've messed up a lot, but throwing you out, that's the worst thing I've ever done." Ed watched him, the hurt still there, heavy but no longer burning. "Why are you telling me all this now?" Kyle looked up, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "Because I don't want us to end like this. I know I can't undo what happened. I know you probably can't trust me anymore. But I'm trying, Dad. I really am." The words weren't polished. They weren't rehearsed. They weren't designed for show. They were raw, halting, real. And for the first time in a long time, Ed saw pieces of the boy he had raised. The kid who used to run to him with scraped knees, who used to crawl into his lap after bad dreams, who once believed his father hung the moon. Ed looked out over the pond, the surface rippling gently. "I'm still hurt," he said quietly. "What happened? It doesn't disappear just because you're sorry." "I know," Kyle whispered. "But," Ed continued, turning back to him, "I don't want this moment, this pain, to define the rest of our lives. I'm too old to carry bitterness the way you're carrying guilt." Kyle swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "So, what does that mean?" "It means," Ed said slowly, "that I'm willing to try. I can't forget. But I won't let that day be the only thing we are." Kyle nodded, shoulders shaking with relief he didn't dare show fully. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "I don't deserve it, but thank you." They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It wasn't angry. It was simply quiet, two men separated by years of hurt, trying to find a bridge between them. After a few minutes, Kyle stood and held out his hand. "Dad." Ed looked at the hand, hesitant tree. Embling hopeful, and took it. The handshake wasn't warm, not yet, but it wasn't cold either. It was a beginning. When they parted, they didn't promise anything. They didn't declare everything fixed. They just walked in opposite directions under the dim streetlights. Not healed, not whole, but no longer enemies. And for now, that was enough to keep the door open for whatever would come next. Snow drifted in soft circles outside the Maple Street house, settling gently on the walkway and rooftop, giving everything a quiet, silver glow. Inside, Ed stood by the front window, holding a small strand of warm white Christmas lights. Nothing fancy, nothing extravagant. He draped them along the curtain rod, stepped back, and nodded. Simple suited him. Simple felt honest. A year had passed since the Christmas that broke him, and the year that rebuilt him. Now, as he plugged in the last light and watched the room fill with a cozy amber glow, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Home. He set up the small tree next, the same one he'd bought from the hardware store clearance bin months ago. It wasn't tall or lush, but the branches were sturdy, and he decorated it with a handful of wooden ornaments he'd carved during slow winter nights. They hung slightly crooked but with intention, imperfect but his. Just as he stepped away from the tree, a knock sounded at the door, light, rhythmic, unmistakable. Jenna and Lily. Ed opened the door to see his granddaughter grinning behind a stack of brightly wrapped gifts. Jenna held a tin of cookies, the steam of the warm house drifting out around them. "Merry almost Christmas," Jenna said, stepping inside. Lily rushed past her and threw her arms around Ed. "Grandpa, it looks so pretty in here." Ed laughed, hugging her back. "You think so? I wasn't sure I remembered how to decorate." "You remembered just fine," Jenna said, squeezing his arm as she set the cookies on the counter. "Actually, better than fine. This feels right." Soon the house filled with the clatter of wrapping paper, the smell of fresh cookies, the sound of Lily humming carols as she examined each ornament on the tree. Jenna moved easily through the kitchen, reheating dishes she'd brought, adjusting things without telling him what to do, respecting the home as his space, not as a place she had to manage. For a moment, Ed felt the kind of peace that arrives quietly, without ceremony. Then the doorbell rang again. This knock was slower, hesitant. Ed opened the door to find Kyle on the doorstep, hands in his pockets, holding a modest casserole dish he clearly hadn't cooked himself. He looked older, just slightly, but the difference wasn't in the lines on his face. It was in his posture, humble, careful, real. "Hey, Dad," Kyle said softly. "Hope I'm not too late." "You're right on time," Ed replied, stepping aside. Kyle entered with no expectations, no pre-written script, no attempt to control the room. Jenna greeted him politely. Lily hugged him, though more gently than she once had. Even Madison wasn't here tonight, by Kyle's choice, not by circumstance. This gathering wasn't about appearances. It was about the people who wanted to be there. The atmosphere hovered between cautious and warm, a fragile balance but a genuine one. They didn't mention last Christmas. They didn't need to. The absence of those words said everything. Dinner unfolded with small talk, laughter, a few long pauses. Kyle asked Ed about work at the hardware store and listened without pretending to understand everything. Jenna told stories from her week. Lily performed a tiny violin snippet she was practicing, soaking in the applause. And then, midway through dessert, Lily set her fork down and asked, "Can we make this Grandpa's house Christmas every year?" Her voice was innocent, but the question landed with gentle weight. Jenna smiled. Kyle looked down, quietly absorbing what the question meant and what it didn't. Ed looked around the table, at Jenna's steady kindness, at Lily's bright hope, at Kyle's tentative effort, at the little tree glowing behind them. This wasn't the family he once imagined. It was better. Not perfect, not polished, but chosen. He felt his chest loosen, the last remnants of bitterness melting into something softer. Revenge, he realized, wasn't about what he'd removed from his son's future. It wasn't about legal documents or changed inheritance or even the long overdue reckoning. His real revenge, the quiet, lasting kind, was building a life that didn't beg for love. A life made of the people who chose him. A life in the house he reclaimed on his own terms. He smiled at Lily and said, "Yeah, sweetheart, I think we can do that." Her grin lit up the room more than the Christmas lights. And for the first time in many years, Ed didn't feel like a father left behind. He felt like a man, finally surrounded by the love he deserved. On Christmas morning, the world outside was hushed, snow smoothing the sidewalks, frosting rooftops, deafening every sound. Most people were still in pajamas, opening gifts, sipping cocoa. But Ed buttoned his work shirt, clipped on his worn name tag, and stepped into the cold. He didn't mind working the holiday shift. In fact, he'd volunteered. "Let the younger ones stay home with their families," he'd told Tom. It wasn't sacrifice. It was something else, something steadier. A sense of belonging he didn't want to miss. The store was quiet when he arrived, the automatic doors sliding open with their familiar whoosh. A few employees were already there, bundled in festive scarves and Santa hats. When they spotted him, they cheered lightly, waving him over. "You really showed up," one of them laughed, pulling him into a hug. "You're the best, Ed." Another coworker clapped him on the back. "Christmas isn't Christmas without aisle 12. He chuckled, a warmth blooming in his chest. For decades, Christmas morning had meant family, tradition, noise. Now it was smaller, simpler, but no less meaningful. Customers trickled in, people who'd forgotten batteries or needed a last-minute tool for a project or wanted a part to fix something before guests arrived. Each one seemed softer today, speaking gently. Many recognized Ed. "Thank you for working today," an older man said, shaking his hand. "Bless you for being here," a woman whispered, wiping snowflakes from her coat. "You always know exactly what I need," another joked, handing him a shopping list she barely understood. Their gratitude settled over him like a warm blanket. Every smile, every thank you, every quiet nod reminded him of the strange, unexpected truth. This store, these aisles, these small moments, had held him up when his own son had not. Toward the end of his shift, Tom approached with a small white envelope in his hand. No big speech, no attention drawn to it, just a simple gesture. "Merry Christmas, Ed," he said. Inside was a handwritten note. "For the man who brings more heart to this store than he'll ever know. Thank you for making aisle 12 a place people feel safe." Tucked behind the note was a holiday bonus, modest, but generous enough to make Ed's throat tighten. He wasn't used to being appreciated without strings attached. "I don't know what to say," Ed murmured. "Just say you'll be back after the holiday," Tom replied with a grin. When the shift ended, Ed clocked out, hung his apron on its hook, and stepped outside. Snow had fallen steadily all morning, covering the town in a soft white. As he walked home, his boots crunching in rhythm, he felt something expanding inside him. Not pride, not nostalgia, but quiet gratitude. When he reached the Maple Street house, warm light glowed from the windows. He paused, surprised. He hadn't left anything on. He opened the door. Jenna stood at the stove, stirring something fragrant. Lily bounded toward him, nearly slipping on the hardwood, laughing as she tackled him in a hug. "You're home," she said, clinging to his coat. "We cooked for you." Kyle sat at the table, no grand gestures, no forced smile, just a small nod of respect, of effort. "Merry Christmas, Dad." Ed smiled softly. "Merry Christmas." They ate together, simple food, nothing fancy. No expectations, no unspoken obligations. Gifts were exchanged after dinner: a knitted scarf from Jenna, a handmade card from Lily, a practical tool set from Kyle. Ed gave them each small tokens, chosen with care but without pressure. The room felt full, not of people but of peace. Later that night, after Kyle and Jenna washed dishes and Lily fell asleep on the couch, Ed slipped away to the doorway of his bedroom. On the dresser sat two things that had shaped his year: his worn hardware store name tag and the deed to the Maple Street house, tucked safely in its folder. He touched the name tag first, faded plastic, edges rubbed from months of wear. Then his fingers brushed the deed, the symbol of everything he reclaimed. A life that was fully his again. He remembered the motel room, the cold floor, the humiliation of that Christmas morning, the sound of the door shutting behind him. And then aisle 12. The job no one expected him to take. The place that gave him purpose when he thought he had none left. He stepped to the front door, opened it, and watched snow drift quietly across the street, catching in the soft evening glow. For the first time, he understood the truth with absolute clarity. The son who threw him out did not define him. The job that welcomed him in did. And in that simple, steady purpose, Ed finally found himself again.